I am Sean Webb, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Rock Goddess, and I am rolling with Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Dave Meltzer, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Zach Poitras, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Paul Selig, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome back. I'm Trey Downs, and this is Your Superior Self. Thank you for taking the time to download this episode. I got a fantastic conversation for you today with Dr. Eben Alexander. Many of you know that I am very, very interested in near-death experiences, just because of the stories that people have after they have them. I mean, they make it back, right? Like they come back from those experiences, and they share what they, the other side, the fascinating love and the stories that they share are just amazing. Dr. Eben Alexander's story is amazing, and I'm so happy that he's here to be able to share it with you. And for those who do not know who he is a physician, neurosurgeon, I should say. He's a neurosurgeon and a teacher at Harvard Medical School, and he's been everywhere. He's a thought leader in that realm. And he had a transcendental near-death experience in 2008, which was a week-long coma from an unexplainable brain infection that changed everything for him. I mean, even his memories of his life were completely deleted. Yet when he awoke from his coma, memories of a fantastic odyssey deep into another realm transpired, and they were more real than this earthly one. And since 2008, he's been able to reconcile his spiritual experience with contemporary physics and cosmology. And he has determined that we are conscious in spite of our brains. And by probing deeply into our own consciousness, we can transcend the limits of the human brain and of the physical material realm, which I am all about. And we also talk about mind over matter, kind of like the law of attraction theory. And this is what he has to say about that.
What I believe is true is that these kind of effects really only work with a tremendous amount of love for self and others, compassion, kindness, forgiveness. When we live our lives making those choices in how we deal with people, and bringing that unconditional love that the NDEer knows so well. We all have the power to bring that to this world. You don't have to have had an NDE to know the healing force of that love. And the more we can bring that into this world, loving ourselves, remembering the divine spiritual beings that we are, and then serving as a conduit for that love out into the world, that's where I believe the healing and the real kind of wholeness of it comes into reality.
Love is the ongoing theme with near-death experiences. Every one of them is subjective. Every one of them is a little different. Well, I mean, they're all different, right? Because they're all very subjective. But the common theme is love. The love that they experience over there is just out of this world. Like, you will never be able to, I guess, experience that on this plane. Maybe you will. I don't know. That is the fun in it, right? Is trying to get to that love level. Try to love someone as yourself. It's hard because of the ego. The ego wants to keep us separate, wants to, give us these ideas that we're better than everyone else, or that we should be feeling a certain type of way towards somebody because they're not like us, or, everyone knows you have certain feelings about people because you think that you're different, when in reality, when in the higher picture of things, we're all the same. I mean, we're all the same on a soul level. Like, we're all from that same source. And we forget that. And that's what he's talking about, remembering the divine being that you are, remembering that. And then when you remember that, you see others as yourself, and the things that you dislike in them is because most of the time they are in yourself. Like, you portray, the reason why you dislike someone most of the time is because you see the things that you dislike about yourself. And so that triggers anger or resentment towards them, when it's really what you need to resolve in yourself on a subconscious level. Anyway, without getting too much into that therapy session, I've seen that for myself. When I change my mind, and I shouldn't say when I change my mind, but when I look at things in a different perspective, I see people on that soul level, and I can see that they're just battling their egos every day. And you can see the reasons why they're doing things, because they feel like they have to achieve a certain amount of success, or they have to do certain things to make themselves look good, because the ego is pushing them in different directions and trying to make them the best that they can be. And it's like you feel kind of, I'm not saying it's like a superior thing. It's not I am more superior than you. It's more like I understand a lot more now, and I look at it with more compassion, and I don't get as angry as much, because I can look at it from that point of view of compassion. And you can't help but feel more love towards people. I mean, if you come with that thought process, it's hard not to love a lot of people. I mean, trust me, there are some people that it's really hard to love. But it's like, if you come with that compassion, if you look at them like, all right, well, they're on the soul level, we come from the same source, and that we are just trying to get through this life and learn more about who we are, and recognize that, and become more aware and awake to that. And you look at them and you say, all right, well, the ego is just pushing them in this direction, and it's pushing them to think all of these things, and they're acting in accordance to that ego. Then you can kind of say, well, that makes sense. Like, that's all right. I can see why they're doing these certain things, and why they're acting a certain way, and why they're maybe doing negative things towards me because they feel threatened, or they feel jealous, or whatever. Like, I can understand that. The ego is just pushing them in a negative direction. And I will come at them with compassion and love, and just love them, because love will trump all of that. And then once you start realizing that, it's easier for you to love more. It's easier, it's not all at once. It's like little by little. And then once you start expanding your heart, you start experiencing more of God. And yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm all about that. But I want to know more about where you're at in your journey, and what's going on with you, and how you're feeling, and what you're up against. I want to know that. So go to TreyDowns.com, leave me a message. I want to hear more from you. Follow me on Instagram at TDowns80, and see some of the behind the scenes stuff of what I'm trying to do to kind of, I'm not going to say kill the ego, because that's impossible for us to do. I'm talking about living with it and just freeing ourselves from that. That's my journey, is trying to free myself from that ego, so I can love more, expand my heart, and experience this realm from a point of consciousness that allows me to be in direct contact with that God source. Pretty powerful stuff. So without further ado, here is my conversation with the great and powerful Dr. Eben Alexander.
Hello, I'm Eben Alexander, MD, neurosurgeon, and author of books Proof of Heaven, The Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. I'm very excited to be here for our conversation today.
Dr. Alexander, this is exciting. I've been a huge fan of you, especially after reading your book, and continuing to read this book, because one, it's not every day that you get a man of science that has had this this extra special experience, and then coming back and writing about it. So for those who do not know, you are the author of the book, Proof of Heaven. You are a neurosurgeon, and you've had an amazing experience, and you write about it in this book. So let's start out like this. Let's go from the beginning. So you start out in the book. You were fighting, I guess it was E. coli meningitis. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a very severe case of E. coli meningoencephalitis. It basically was an inflammation going through all 6 layers of my neocortex and all 8 lobes of my brain. And the thing that makes it interesting from a scientific perspective is the fact that I had such well-documented damage to my brain. And that's something that I portrayed in the book Proof of Heaven, especially in the appendices, where I talked about the failure of certain materialist neuroscience explanations to kind of cover this kind of experience. But also there has been a case report that was written by 3 physicians who were fascinated by my miraculous recovery, but were not involved in my care. And that case report came out in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2018. And anyone who wants to access that case report can do so on my website at ebenalexander.com on the blog postings for September of 2018. In the 3rd paragraph, there's a link directly to that case report. And the thing that makes it so extraordinary, and the reason I think the scientific community pays a lot of attention to my case, is just this, it's rare to have this kind of documentation of the damage to the brain by a given process that really should have killed me, and at the very least just left me maimed and in a nursing home for a few months before I died. And yet within 2 months I had recovered completely, with complete recovery of memories that had seemingly been lost during the NDE itself. I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life. That amnesia is kind of an atypical feature of my case, but in retrospect it was very important for a lot of the lessons I was to learn about the relationship between mind and brain, the very nature of consciousness, and kind of the fundamental nature of reality, given that all of us are kind of slave to our consciousness and its representation of a world we assume to be out there. So it's been an extraordinary journey of discovery. And just like all NDEs, mine was kind of tailored to the individual. So in the last 12 years, kind of unpacking that, I still have a very long way to go. I don't expect to fully understand any of this in this lifetime. But the reality is I can always ask better questions.
Sure.
Now,
that before this experience, were you very scientific? Were you very analytical? Did you have, what was your spiritual background? Were you an atheist, religious at all?
Well, I was very much a scientist, and I'm more of a scientist today than I've ever been. But I also came to realize after my coma that the conventional materialist model of brain creates consciousness, the physical world is all that exists, is false. And we need a much bigger theater of operation to understand it all. So I've shifted a lot in that respect. But to get back to your question, I was very influenced by my father. He was a combat surgeon in the Second World War. He had a very strong faith in God, which I think got him through the World War II experience relatively unscathed. He came back to the U.S. and headed up a neurosurgical training program. He was very scientific, studied physics, cosmology, all this kind of thing. And yet he also was very kind of spiritual. He had grown up, his own father had been a general surgeon in Eastern Tennessee, and Dad grew up during the Depression and, of course, Second World War. And he always went to that Presbyterian church. And in fact, when he was an academic neurosurgeon, he was fully engaged with prayer and believed it helped a lot with his patient care. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And like so many of us from that era, I was always knew that science is absolutely the pathway to truth. Just that I made the mistake of getting kind of sucker punched by a deterministic Newtonian form of science that doesn't involve advanced interpretation of quantum physics at all. So I just thought the brain somehow creates consciousness, and tended to agree with some of those conventional neuroscientists who believe consciousness doesn't even exist. It's an epiphenomenon of electron fluxes, chemical reactions in the brain. And so I bought into that kind of materialist mindset until my coma, which showed me the exact opposite to be the case. And the other important thing is I did, I went to a Methodist church growing up, and then through a long career in academic neurosurgery, including 15 years at Harvard Medical School, where I taught as an associate professor. For much of that time, was going to church, taking my kids to church and praying with them at night and things like that. But I really was confused about how any kind of consciousness could survive the death of the brain and body. And to me, that was a big mystery. And for those who have read Proof of Heaven, they'll realize that I entered a dark night of the soul for 8 years before my coma. That had to do with that revelation in February 2000, when I got word back from a social worker. It has to do with the fact that I was adopted. I had kind of given up looking for my birth mother in my 20s. I just thought, fine, I got into a beautiful, loving, adoptive family, so I can just forget about it. The children's home would kind of rebuff all of my letters asking for information, because North Carolina had very strict laws to prevent reunions of adoptees with their birth family. And so I could live with that. But then in February 2000, my older son, Eben IV, who was in sixth grade and school in Dover, Massachusetts at the time, had a school project on family genealogy. And the implication of that project was that I needed to reach out to the children's home yet again to seek information on my birth family. And that story is told in Proof of Heaven, but to cut it really short and sweet, driving down a road through a blizzard in February 2000, I remembered, oh yes, the social worker wanted to call today. She might have information. And at that point, she did have information that was kind of shocking to me. And that is that my birth parents had gotten married. That was never a thought I entertained. And all of my kind of intuitions about it, I thought my birth father had long ago left the scene. They'd never gotten together. And I found out I was wrong. In fact, my birth mother and father married, had 3 children, so I had a full biological family out there. But they had lost their youngest daughter 2 years earlier, in 1998. And it was due to her loss and their grieving that the social worker at least interpreted that it was not a good time to come back in their lives. And I didn't realize it until months after that. But it was really, that was the beginning of my dark night of the soul, that perceived rejection from my birth mother. And if you read about adoption stories, you'll find that another rejection in adult life can be very damaging. And that's exactly what happened to me, even though I didn't recognize it happening. When I stopped saying prayers with my kids, I stopped taking them to church, I really became very agnostic. And that was the case right up until 2008 when I had my coma. And of course, I'll never go back. The experience of that infinite loving force is one you can never, ever forget. That's why near-death experiencers come back and very commonly have no fear of death, because they realize it's not an end, it's a transition to actually a higher form of consciousness. So I've been kind of up and down about all this, and especially in the last 12 years since my coma, working with scientists around the world on the issue of consciousness, because I promise you it's one of the, if not the deepest mystery to modern science, is the nature of consciousness and relationship between brain and mind. And I've gotten deeply involved in the scientific investigation of that question over the last 12 years.
I bet. It's so fascinating because you experienced this as a human being. You experienced the coma, you experienced the other side. And then you were able to come back and have this miracle happen to you where you were able to regain your memory and cognition and abilities to be a scientist again. And you have the qualifications to go back and look at all your brain scans, all the documentation that the hospital had on you, and perceive it for yourself. Like, explain that. Like, when you saw all of the documentation that was taken on you, like, what were your thoughts when you were seeing those scans?
Well, excellent question, because it was extremely confusing. Important to point out that my amnesia during this NDE was complete. I had no words, no language, no knowledge of Earth, of humanity, absolutely zero memories of Eben Alexander's life, no religious concepts. All of my knowledge of science was completely deleted. Now, when I first came back to this world, I didn't even recognize my mother, my sons, my sisters at the bedside. I had no idea who these beings were. All I knew was this extraordinary journey that I had just been through. And, but interestingly enough, things like language started coming back extremely rapidly, literally within hours of my first kind of coming to some meager conscious awareness in that ICU bed while I was still on the ventilator. Language was coming back very rapidly. And childhood memories came back over the next week or two. And then all of that semantic knowledge about cosmology, physics, neuroscience came back over about 2 months. The shocking thing is that based on very detailed conversations with close family and friends about distant past memories and events, I came to discover in the months after my coma that the memories were more complete than they had been before the coma. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing that we cover in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, my third book, co-written with my partner, Karen Newell. We devote an entire appendix to how memory is not localized in the brain. But it's one of the big shockers about modern neuroscience is there doesn't seem to be any locus of storage of long-term memories in the brain at all. And it's one of the last nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience, that you will not be able to define memories as actually stored in the brain, even though the brain does have some mechanisms that are responsible for conversion of short-term to long-term memory, that kind of thing. But their long-term storage doesn't occur in the brain itself. Just like consciousness is not created by the brain or produced by the brain, but it's something that's filtered in. The brain serves as a filter or transceiver that allows expression of consciousness and memory, but it is not the producer of them. It's best to look at the brain and body as kind of like the display on your computer. So yes, the display is very important. That's how the information is presented to you. But in fact, there's a tremendous amount going on behind the scenes that determines what appears on your computer screen. That's all way down at the CPU level and all that. And in this analogy, all that is beyond the physical realm and the physical workings of the brain.
Mm. So like the body, would that be more so like the hardware, and the consciousness would be the software, right? I mean, I'm just making an analogy.
Exactly. The consciousness is the program, and the consciousness is really the information. And I mean, one of the things that to me was very shocking about my NDE, some people think that all NDE does is to kind of magnify and amplify your religious beliefs. Well, couldn't be further from the truth, because actually when you study NDEs, you find they very often, the content shifts someone's religious beliefs dramatically. And for me, some of the major shifts that were absolutely essential to understand my NDE had to do with understanding the reality of, for one thing, that identity with God. I came away with seeing in my core realm experience that I describe in Proof of Heaven, that oneness and identity with that God force. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with anybody's ego or that linguistic voice in the brain or the kind of I became God. You know, that is not what we're talking about here. But what you find is, especially in deep meditation, I've duplicated this, and also in many people that I work with who have not had NDEs have come to similar kind of realizations, is that identity with God, with that loving force, can be very, very healing. And that is certainly not something that would have been allowed in the Methodist church that I grew up in North Carolina, that you became one with God. The other thing that's interesting in terms of my journey is I also realized the importance of reincarnation. For me, when I came back to this world, having had the visions I had of that infinitely loving personal God, there was no way to reconcile that with a lot of the suffering in our world, especially the suffering of innocence, children, animals, that kind of thing, except to acknowledge the reality that our souls come back again and again, that it's never just one trip in, birth to death, nothing more. And I didn't realize at the time, but there's a tremendous scientific literature on reincarnation. It's mainly based, from my point of view, out of University of Virginia. UVADOPS.org is an excellent resource. But the reality is, since the late 1960s, Dr. Ian Stevenson and now Dr. Jim Tucker had studied more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children, where the best explanation was actually of reincarnation. So this is not about religious beliefs and about whether you want to believe or whether you have any memories of having been here before, because that's kind of interesting that the memories are deleted. They're hard to come by, and yet in the world of transpersonal psychology with hypnotic regression and meditative techniques, you find, more than 100,000 patients have benefited from going deep into consciousness and recovering memories of past lives that actually are crucial to understanding the events in this lifetime. And it's because our soul journey is one that keeps track of kind of our choices in life and how we treat other people and treat ourselves and what we learn about existence as we go through these incarnations. And it is not a kind of a blind mechanistic wheel like some religious systems of reincarnation, but actually one that's very kind of goal directed towards, I would say, the evolution of consciousness itself. And we are, each and every one of us, participants in that kind of tremendous evolution that is happening. And understanding these bigger facets of human spirit and kind of the nature of our souls and the reality of them and the responsibility we face for our choices we make in life. All of this is very important, but it means becoming a much larger self than the little kind of ego self that I was before my coma. And this is one of my main interests now, with certainly with meditation and workshops and trying to help other people come to these same lessons.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on all of that. I think it's the development. I didn't really believe in reincarnation, so I was Methodist. I grew up Methodist as well, and then I started following the Catholic community more when we entered when my kids went to Catholic school. And
Mhm.
if you mention reincarnation, they just look at you funny. And I wasn't a big believer in it. And then I started reading some near-death experiences. Dr. Moody from UVA, his book, and it's funny. A lot of like you said earlier, a lot of individuals' journeys are different. However, there's that reoccurring theme of love, that like this love that you cannot even put in words when you go, on the other side, when you lift that veil during these NDEs. And they come back and they talk about that oneness that you're talking about, of being with that God, that universe. And that's what, you see it a lot in the NDEs, like it definitely in your book. And that's why I really love, the reason why I really love your book is because, one, you have the experience to kind of look at the physical body and kind of dissect exactly what's happening with your body and tell everybody in layman's terms what's not functioning, why it's not functioning, and why it's so miraculous that you're here right now. But can you talk about the other side, seeing through the veil or underneath the veil? Like you talk about your first experience on the other side, like there's this part where you're like something about a worm analogy. Can you explain some of that?
Right. Absolutely. Again, reminding people, amnesia. I had no idea. I had an empty slate, no memories of humans or this universe as this whole set of events unfolded. It began what I call the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive course on responsive realm. It was like being in dirty jello. I had no body awareness at any point during the near-death experience. In that earthworm eye view, I was a piece of awareness. I could kind of record and note things. And I remember this strong sensation of roots or blood vessels all around me. I'm sure I had no memory of moment to moment, so it seemed to last forever, and yet it didn't. There came a slowly spinning white light that had fine silvery and golden tendrils off of it. And as it came towards me, I realized it was packaged with a perfect musical memory. And the music is very important because a lot of the work I do today has to do with sound, especially a form called sacred acoustics. People can look for that at sacredacoustics.com. It's a tool for meditation. But for me in my journey, sound was absolutely crucial to enabling me to traverse these various spiritual realms. And it's important to point out that, of course, in those realms, you're not hearing anything with the ears and you're not seeing anything with the eyes. Your experience is often through what I call knowledge through identification, where you actually become huge swathes of the scene around you. Now, that first spinning light and melody served as a portal and ushered me up into this rich, ultra-real gateway valley, as I call it. It had a lot of Earth-like features. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. We were above this very verdant, fertile valley. In many ways, like Plato's world of ideals, there was no sign of any death or decay. It was kind of a perfect world, and there were lots of sparkling waterfalls into crystal blue pools. And I was one of millions of butterflies that were looping and spiraling in these vast formations over this valley. And yet below us, I could see thousands of beings. And I described them in my early writings when I came back to this world as souls between lives. Now, important to point out that no language was present at all in my entire journey. So all the words that I chose to use were chosen, many weeks, the months after my journey, when I was trying to record the whole thing and write it down. But as it occurred, there was no language involved at all. And that's a little bit misleading because the modes of knowing are so extreme in that area. And as I said, you become huge swathes of what the universe is trying to show you. Now, in that Gateway Valley, that would be, for example, the kind of region where people would have a life review. Life review is not a New Age concept. It's part of NDEs, near-death experiences. It goes back at least 2,400 years to the time of Plato, when Armenian soldier was killed in battle, dead on the battlefield several days. They finally put him up on a funeral pyre. He woke up right before they ignited it. And his story was basically, when you die, your life flashes before your eyes. All the meaningful lessons still to be learned are revisited. And the only thing that matters is how much love you have managed to hand out to your fellow beings. He told this to his group of soldiers, after this tremendous battle, that love was the most important thing in the world. And that was 2,400 years ago. And that story could come from an Iraqi war veteran having an NDE today. So this hasn't changed, and it's universal. It's across all cultures and belief systems. All different religious systems have reported similarities in NDEs and what they show us about these realms. And so in that beautiful Gateway Valley, that was where I also found my kind of guardian angel, as I came to call her later in my writings, and this beautiful woman who was on the butterfly wing with me. And her message to me, I think, was the central message I was to bring back to this world. It came to me telepathically. She looked at me with this beautiful smile, sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, high forehead, soft brown hair. She was dressed in the same kind of simple peasant garb as all those thousands of beings dancing below, but it was very colorful. Colors really beyond the rainbow in this whole scene. It was amazing. And her message to me was very simple. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You will be taken care of. And again, it was not in those words, but that was the emotional power of what came through. That was the reassurance and the affirmation of my right to be there and to exist and to be worthy of that love. That was, as an adoptee, that had been something I'd struggled with my whole life. At age 11 days, I was put into a hospital for failure to thrive. And that was really my departure from my birth mother. And even though I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family, there was always that kind of smoking crater left in my soul about why was I left behind. My dad, the neurosurgeon, used to tell me, you can't possibly remember anything that happened to you with those early, weeks and months of life. And yet I know now that I did remember it. It was, in fact, the only thing I remembered. It's what shaped my relationship to the world through much of my life. And yet those kind of things are so hard to get in touch with because they happen before we're born. And that was a struggle that went right into my NDE, was that not being worthy of love. And yet my NDE was proving to me that at a very deep level with connection to the universe, I did have that worthiness. Now, in fact, those angelic choirs that were present in that Gateway Valley, that ultra real kind of earth-like, but also deeply spiritual realm, they were swooping above and they were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that were fueling all this incredible festivity and mirth going on below me in the valley. And yet the angelic choirs provided yet another portal to higher and higher levels, as I describe in Proof of Heaven. That's where I was led up into the core. The core is in many ways kind of beyond the boundary where most NDEers have already come back to this world. And that core realm is by far the furthest from our kind of earthly human experience. The entire higher dimensional multiverse had been shrunken down to this complex oversphere as part of what I was to learn there. And I was always told going into the core, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. And what would happen is, with many of the lessons and spiritual lessons and all that I gleaned in that area, I would then tumble back down to that earthworm eye view. But that's where remembering the musical notes of the melody were very crucial, because they would always, just by going into that memory, that little cadence of that perfect melody I had first heard with that portal that led me out of the earthworm's eye view, I could then re-enter that Gateway Valley using those musical notes and conjuring up that portal, until the very end of my NDE, after I'd made several cycles through these spiritual levels, where just as I've been told, you're not here to stay in that core realm, I could no longer conjure up, using the musical notes, the melody up into the Gateway Valley. So I was kind of stuck in those murky realms. And, to say I was depressed would be kind of an understatement. It was very kind of saddening. And yet, by that time, I knew I could trust that I would be taken care of, that this universe had that love for me, and that I had nothing to fear. And that's when I witnessed thousands of beings going off around me into the distance, heads down, many with their arms up like that, this murmuring energy coming from them. And how I described that later in my writings was I could feel the energy of their praying for me. And it was the thing that was so shocking was it was the same beautiful, affirming joy and love and acceptance that I had experienced in those higher spiritual realms, in the Gateway Valley and the core. And yet here it was happening in the lowest realms, kind of in proximity with kind of the material, the murkiness of and thickness of the material realm. And that's also when I saw the 6 faces that appeared to me at the very end. They were very important because they provided time anchors. They were basically 5 of them people who were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours of my coma. And notably, many of the family and friends who'd been present earlier in the week, I had no memory of at all. So that particular set of memories at the very end of it all pointed me to the realization that the vast majority of the coma journey had to happen between days 1 and 5 of a 7-day coma. And so all of that was crucial information to kind of help me start unraveling this NDE and making sense of it.
I love every bit of that.
Well, it's an amazing gift, I will say.
But I want to, side note here, what you talked about the person, you being adopted and for your guardian angel to say, you are loved no matter what, no matter, what you think of yourself, you're always going to be fully loved. I mean, that guardian angel plays a huge part, because not only when you come out of this, you're developing back to being normal, I guess you can call it that, but you're also remembering everything that happened. And for the people that are listening, I'm going to give you this little nugget. The person, that guardian angel, is very significant to you, right?
Yes.
But you later realized, and can you talk about that?
Yeah, and this is a spoiler alert for anyone. I won't go into detail because
Sure.
The story itself is so absolutely astonishing and beautiful. But the kind of upshot of it is that I mentioned earlier the adoption story and my birth family, and having lost that youngest sister 2 years before I even know she existed. Well, it turns out that life went on for me after that perceived rejection. And then finally, walking on a beach in South Carolina in 2007, 2 of my sisters said, "Don't you think it's time you reached out to your birth family again?" Now, of course, what I knew by that point is that it had really sent me into a dark night of the soul, kicked me over the cliff. So my first response was, no, I'm not going to do that. But they were right. There were some kind of holes in my life. They could see I was still kind of struggling with things. And so I wrote another letter to the children's home. That was in August of 2007. And a few weeks later, I actually got a beautiful response in the form of a letter that came via the social worker at the children's home that my birth family did want to get together. And there was more information about that birth family. And it turns out I did meet them October 5th, 2007. And that's something else that I tell that whole story in the book, because it's a very important part of it all. But the reality is it was a kind of a bittersweet reunion. That loving youngest sister, was a notable presence. They were still grieving her loss. And I wanted to know much more about her. But anyway, what then unfolded was I went into my coma journey and had this beautiful guardian angel on the butterfly wing. And when I came back to this world, I never really read the NDE literature before. And after I wrote the first 20,000 words describing my own experience, untainted by anyone else's NDE, that's when I dove deep into that literature and realized that any kind of guardian angel should be someone who was very important to you in your life before. So if I had scripted this, that would have been my father, the neurosurgeon who was so influential in my life, very spiritual, but also very scientific. And he had passed over 4 years before my coma. And yet he was nowhere to be seen in my coma memories. And this part was very confusing to me. And I remember that beautiful woman so well because her kind of mind meld with me had been so complete. I could feel her kind of emotional everything in relationship to me in a very profound way. And yet, given the amnesia for Eben Alexander's life, I was not really allowed to see a relationship then, even though I didn't really even have the memories before my coma to help me put that story together. And I remember I had asked my other birth sister, Kathy, if she would send me a picture of Betsy at some point, which she did, 4 months after my coma. And this one picture, it turns out that I saw it right after, the day after I'd read a beautiful part of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, Life After Death. And in that book, she tells a story of I think a 13-year-old girl who had a profound coma in NDE, was welcomed to the heavenly realm by her brother. And then she came back to this world. And when she explained it all to her father, she said, "But I don't understand. I don't have a brother." And he said, "Well, you did, but he died 3 months before you were born. So we never told you about him." But she had met him when she crossed over in her NDE. And I read that story, and it was the next day when I had this picture arrive and put it up on my dresser and put it all together, that, oh my God, that was my birth sister. And the whole thing fell together. It's almost in the picture like she's looking at me as if to say, "Do you finally get it?" And yes, Betsy, I'm finally getting it. So yes, that was the absolute stunning. I mean, I couldn't even stand up for 30 minutes after I made that connection. It connected all the realms, all the way into that deep spiritual experience, all the way back to this world. And the rest of it has just been a process of discovery and refinement and kind of deeper understanding.
Man, that's such a beautiful story. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it was just so touching for me. It was just like, not only am I having this amazing experience, but, come to find out, I'm experiencing a family member that I never met before in my life that is a guardian angel, like it's just amazing.
Absolutely. It was stunning. And there's a tremendous amount more of that backstory that doesn't appear in Proof of Heaven, but it is absolutely heartwarming and affirmative that this is a very real connection, not just some wild kind of made up nonsense.
So after, let's say 6 months goes past after your NDE, have you been able to recreate that? Have you been able to lift the veil and go back?
Well, I use meditation a lot. I mentioned earlier Sacred Acoustics. Full disclosure, Sacred Acoustics was co-founded by my life partner and by the co-author of our third book, my third book, Living in a Mindful Universe. Her name is Karen Newell. But I've been using those kind of sacred acoustics tones. They're differential frequency brain entrainment. And what that all means, at least what I think it means, and we explain this in our book, but that these sounds are processed mainly in the lower brainstem. And so any sound you may have ever heard in your life that engendered a transcendental kind of experience, like a chant or anthem or hymn or something like that, those are all processed up in the neocortex, up in the temporal lobes of the acoustic cortex, in circuits that have arisen over the last, basically 1 to 10 million years in primates and humans. But the sacred acoustics tones and other binaural beat brain entrainment are actually signals processed way down in the lower brainstem in circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago, before the advent of mammals on this earth. They were originally a localization system for threats. That's why that same circuit is still used. If I hear a snap behind my head, that circuit, the superior olivary nucleus in my lower brainstem, calculates the arrival time of those sound waves going at 1,000 feet per second and can figure out exactly where the sound is. So it's still a very powerful circuit, and we can use that when we can actually modulate that circuit, which we do with sacred acoustics tones. It drives the dominant ascending signals from the lower brainstem that basically link together all of the thalamocortical loops and all the other processes that we believe contribute to unified conscious awareness. So this unification is very important. And again, we're not saying the brain creates consciousness, but in looking at the brain as a filter, we can see how this kind of physiology of this modulation of those lower circuits tends to allow consciousness to be set free. And Karen and I have shown this many a time in our workshops and If you go to the testimonials page on Sacred Acoustics, you can see a lot of other benefits people have had. In fact, we did a pilot study looking at sacred acoustics use in a New York psychiatric practice published by Dr. Anna Yusum in February 2020 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And in this study, Dr. Yusum found that binaural beats, sacred acoustics, was very beneficial in alleviating anxiety in 26% of her patients that she studied over 2 weeks. And that's compared to only a 7% benefit in the patients who did not have those sounds involved in their treatment. So that pilot study is just the beginning of showing the power that these kind of tones can have in alleviating anxiety, depression. All of this is especially important in COVID era. That's why we've also done a practitioner course with Dr. Yusum to help educate mental health practitioners about the use of sacred acoustic sounds to help alleviate anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, things like that. These are all very important things to be doing at this point in time. And sacred acoustics has turned out to be a validated and very useful and quite powerful tool for use in these kind of disorders. And that's why we invite people to, for example, unitedinhopeandhealing.com is a free bi-monthly webinar that Karen and I are giving to help people get up to speed with the utility of these kind of sounds. And also we're spreading it, as I said, in that course that is also available. So if people go to ebenalexander.com and sacredacoustics.com, they can learn a lot more about these offerings and about their abilities to use these tools.
I love it. So you did go, I mean, I've seen you do some testimonials for the Monroe Institute too. Like, did you actually go and experience some of their courses or experiences over there?
Yes, and in fact, that's where Karen and I met in November of 2011, 3 years after my coma. We were both very interested in sound and differential frequency sound brain entrainment in particular for enhancing meditative techniques. Karen had a lifelong interest in this and she'd been to 13 Monroe courses, so she was very versed in Robert Monroe's kind of system. I worked there as a research director for a while. And it turns out that, you know, in many ways we tried to collaborate with them to kind of enhance these offerings. It's a long story, but it turns out that we ended up having to go our own way. And that was with Karen's business partner, the other co-founder of Sacred Acoustics is Kevin Cossey. He's the sound engineer. And it's really just the two of them, Kevin and Karen, and they've created this incredible Sacred Acoustics. And I think if people visit that website, they'll find it a tremendous resource for meditation, for various tools, kind of instruction. She has some instructional videos there. And you'll find there's an excellent repertoire of sound files to work with for all kinds of kind of spiritual journeying, even something as simple as studying. For example, my oldest son, Eben the Fourth, who's now a resident in physical medicine and rehab, but he studied for some of his medical board exams listening to theta tones, just pure theta out of Sacred Acoustics. And he was very impressed with the improvement in his board scores, which he attributes to listening to theta tones. So I think if you explore Sacred Acoustics website, you'll find that there are tools for many different purposes, enhancing creativity, kind of spiritual journeying, finding seeking souls of departed loved ones. I mean, all these kind of things are fair game when you start to thin that veil and recognize that you're far more than your little ego mind, you know, in a birth to death incarnation.
That's awesome. It's kind of funny how, you know, you were on the other side and the vibrations and the songs or the hymns are what really helped bring you out of that wormhole and able to bring you in different levels to the core. And then over here in reality, what we think is reality, the vibrations of hemisync and synchronization of the hemispheres allows us to experience the other side. It's kind of crazy.
It really is fascinating to me, but of course there are no accidents. And to me, it's beautiful and poetic that for all that I discovered about sound being a mechanism of transfer in those regions, and of course, again, to reiterate, those are not sounds heard with any ears. They are not limited by the physics of four-dimensional space-time. That's why they're so absolutely beautiful and captivating. They cannot be fully reproduced in this world. And yet the good news is any and every one of us as a sentient being has the power to come into the presence of those kind of sounds and visions and understandings, the information flow, knowledge through identification, every bit of that. Now, I will confess one thing, and that is in all of my efforts, an hour or two a day of meditation using sacred acoustics over the last 10 years or so, I have never fully duplicated the ultra reality that was such a stunning property of the Gateway Valley and the core realm. That ultra reality, for one thing, it has to do with a complete slipping out of space and time. That's why when people describe life reviews, it doesn't matter if say their NDE happens during a cardiac arrest where they're only gone for 3 or 4 minutes from this world, clinically dead. And an entire life review occurs. It doesn't cut any corners, but that's because time flow in those realms is much richer and deeper. I call it deep time. It's a whole different ordering of causality that can allow for a journey. From my journey, for example, seemed to last for months or years, and yet it had to fit within basically 5 Earth days because of my perceptions during the coma. And yet there are no such time limitations on that other side. We're fully wide open. I mean, time flow itself is one of the biggest mysteries of modern physics. And I think there's no way we will fully come to a better understanding of time until we have a better understanding of consciousness. Because in fact, deep under the physics formulas and everything else is this kind of knowledge that time doesn't seem to be a property of the underlying reality, but time is a property kind of laid on by our consciousness in its kind of laying out of the reality we perceive and bring back to this world.
Quick question about quantum physics. So do you believe or know that if we, breaking it down to the quantum, everything is energy or vibrations. Do you think that we can, we've already created our reality, like we're here, you and I are speaking, so we've created it this far. Do you think that we can change it by like maybe an example of law of attraction or having an intention about something that you want in your life that you can kind of bring it to you or attract it to you?
I think we can, absolutely. That's basically called mind over matter. And it is absolutely the rule of this emerging science of consciousness. Now, a perfect example of how science has admitted, yes, mind over matter is real. For decades, look at placebo effect. That's the gold standard in medicine and has been since the 1950s or so. And in fact, placebo effect has been used for thousands of years in healing. But placebo effect is nothing more than an admission by medical science that beliefs and kind of thoughts and attitudes have a tremendous role in shaping our emerging reality. The kind of benchmark figure you can attach to placebo is it's about 30% of the benefit that we ever see across the board with all kinds of treatments is probably due to just the patient's beliefs that they can get better. And it applies not just with medications, but even with certain procedures. Like surgical procedures. There was a study about 3 or 4 years ago done in England. You couldn't even do the study in the US. It was looking at the use of coronary artery stenting in the heart to prevent angina, chest pain. And basically there are about 500,000 of those procedures done a year, at least there were before this study. And that study in the UK did a sham procedure in patients where they put a catheter into a vessel, but they didn't actually place a stent. And what they found is placebo effect from the sham was just as good as the effect of the treatment itself. So placebo effect is very powerful. And in fact, it's more than just treating a headache with a sugar pill. If you go to noetic.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, put in the search term spontaneous remission, you'll find a book that they published in the mid-1990s. It's out of print now, but you can download the entire book for free from their website. And it's got more than 3,500 cases of people with advanced cancer, advanced infections, some with congenital deformities, things we were born with, others with advanced degenerative diseases. But all of these people got better and healed in spite of failures or avoidance of Western medical techniques. So that's why that particular study is so important, is it emphasizes the power our beliefs have in kind of modulating our very health. So mind over matter is absolutely real. It's the way the world has always worked. And so much of the problem is that our culture teaches us that, it's all material, physical world. There's nothing else to it. In fact, a hardcore interpretation of materialist neuroscience is we don't even have free will. If it's just those electrons and chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, creating an illusion of consciousness, an illusion of free will. And yet I think just the opposite is what's actually going on. That's where medical science, in many ways, can lead the way on this, although medical education continues to be very kind of materialist physics, chemistry, biology in its focus, instead of really harping on what modern studies of placebo effect are revealing about the power of our beliefs and our will to influence our reality. Now, you had mentioned, like The Secret, things like that. I don't tend to go for those interpretations because they're all kind of, sometimes they portray kind of a greedy, materialistic endpoint for the desires. But what I believe is true is that these kind of effects really only work with a tremendous amount of love for self and others, compassion, kindness, forgiveness. When we live our lives making those choices in how we deal with people, and bringing that unconditional love that the NDEer knows so well, we all have the power to bring that to this world. You don't have to have had an NDE to know the healing force of that love. And the more we can bring that into this world, loving ourselves, remembering the divine spiritual beings that we are, and then serving as a conduit for that love out into the world, that's where I believe the healing and the real kind of wholeness of it comes into reality. I really don't like the interpretations where people try and pretend this is the way to get that Mercedes Benz in your driveway. Because to me, the challenges and issues and the responsibilities we have as souls are far, far grander than such petty little material concerns.
Absolutely. I could speak to you forever. How can people reach out to you and find out more about you?
Best is just go to ebenalexander.com. That's EBEN Alexander.com. Look at my blog postings. There are links there to a lot of interviews, presentations. There's also a reading list that's very extensive, more than 100 links to books and many live links to papers. They're all categorized depending on their relevance to certain kind of subfields within science and spirituality. And then, of course, other kind of questions people might have about my story are all answered in the FAQ area. So it's a very rich resource. I would also highly encourage people to visit my partner and co-author of A Living Mindful Universe, her website, sacredacoustics.com. You'll find that to be a very rich resource to help get going in all this. Also, I would tell people on my website, ebenalexander.com, there's an invitation when you get to that homepage, wiggles in your face, your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. Just leave your first name and email address there, and you'll be off and running on a 33-day email campaign from my website that more than 9,000 people around the world have now taken this course. They've left their comments, their translate buttons for people all over the world to participate. They help each other. They share experiences. It's all about building a community to grow. And of course, unitedinhopeandhealing.com is another resource that Karen and I run. It's a bi-monthly webinar that I think is very instructive. It's free, and people can look at many of the guests we've had in the past, or some of the noted luminaries in consciousness studies in the NDE community, Dr. Pim Van Lommel, Dr. Raymond Moody, Dr. Larry Dossi, Suzanne Giesman. I mean, the list goes on and on, Anita Morjani and others. We have a lot of people that we've interviewed, and I think it makes for a very rich repertoire for people to view, and that's at unitedinhopeandhealing.com.
I love it. Great resources. Guys, make sure you go out and and find Dr. Alexander and sign up for his 33-day course that he has. I mean, it's amazing. Lastly, Dr. Alexander, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think really just that I help the world to wake up to what I think all the major prophets have tried to tell us for thousands of years, that our relationship is of oneness. We're all truly bound in this together. To hurt another is to hurt myself. The golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe through the prevalence of life reviews in near-death experiences. And really just to help bring this lesson to the fore, from my point of view, the fact that it now is something that is very consistent with the growing science of consciousness is what will help spread it far and wide, because science is our kind of universal arbiter of what we can share as a shared objective truth, and especially with personal journeying, with the powerful tools of meditation like sacred acoustics. It is time this world woke up to this, and I believe that a far more peaceful, harmonious, loving world is within our reach. In fact, I think we could do this within a generation if we can simply upshift our conscious awareness to this deeper reality that is fully supported by the emerging science of consciousness. But essentially the Beatles had it right. All you need is love, and indie ears will tell you that in spades. And I promise you, there's not a problem on this earth that wouldn't start to improve dramatically right now if everyone treated themselves and others with kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, and when necessary, forgiveness. And never forget gratitude, because this journey that we all share together is a gift beyond any possible imagination. It really is a true gift, and all souls are involved. Karen and I often say, no soul left behind.
Well said. I love every bit of that. Make sure you guys go out and get his book, Proof of Heaven. I endorse it. I highly suggest you go out and get it. It's changed my viewpoints. It's bringing me closer to that love. I am love idea. It's not an idea, it's a truth. Dr. Alexander, thank you so much for joining the show. This has been truly an honor.
Well, Trey, thank you so much for having me on. It's great talking with you. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you to Dr. Eben Alexander for joining the show. I want to say thank you to you, the listener, for hanging out with me today. Please go to treydowns.com. Leave me a message. Let me know where you're at in your journey. Follow me on Instagram at tdowns80. Let me know your thoughts. Guys, I hope you have an amazing week. Peace and love, and I'll talk to you later.